We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and wherever you find your podcasts. Since my partner died when I was in my 30s, I've been interested in finding a spiritual path. What would happen if instead of railing against the suffering that's blown into my corner of the world or complaining about the inevitables of life, what if I could accept things as they are? Life is hard for everybody, not just me. And if things don't go my way, it's not because I'm not talented enough or hardworking or exercised enough or had the necessary foresight. That's just how things are. We all have to face sickness, old age, and death. Now, while most spiritual paths bypass this unwelcome trinity, there is one which faces sickness, old age, and death all the time. My witness on The Meaningful Life is Peter Coyote, who's an actor who's been in several famous Hollywood movies, an award-winning narrator, and most importantly for this podcast, a teacher of Zen, a form of Buddhism that started in China but has spread throughout the world. He's been a Zen student since 1974. He was ordained as a Zen Buddhist priest in 2011, and 4 years later he received a transmission, which is their way of saying he became an independent teacher and able to make ordinations himself. Peter Coyote is also the author of Zen in the Vernacular, Things as It Is. We will talk about the grammatical error later. It is important and intentional. But before we find out more about Zen, I'd like to hear a bit about yourself, Peter. What was going on in your life when you discovered Buddhism?
If we start with the initial discovery, I was very young. I was about 12 years old. I was born in 1941. And so in 1953, the country was in a paroxysm of anti-communism. World War II was over. America had realized that it was going to be in competition with the Soviet Union for world resources and ideology and such as that. And the government took a kind of ham-handed way of going about it by branding everything left of Hitler as pink, red, communist. And I had members of my family who were communists and who were socialists. But, these were labor organizers, school teachers. They were open-hearted people. They fell for the glow and the ideology of communism until they ran face-to-face with Stalin and saw what it could be. And they left the party. And many years later, Joseph McCarthy put them under attack. He lied about them. He called them spies. And I was infuriated. It was many, many, many years. I was in my 20s before I could salute the flag because of people lying about my family and their intentions. And I stumbled, I guess not 53, but maybe a year or two later, I stumbled on the Beats, the American writers who were giving me a form for my discontent. They were introducing me to ideas of socialism and different political formats. But the curious thing was that they all mentioned Buddhism, and many of them mentioned Zen. And among them, the first among equals was this American poet named Gary Snyder. So when I went to college, I was part of the black turtleneck sweater, camel cigarette crowd. I was going to be a poet, and I am a poet. I'm working on my second book of poems. But it was kind of a secret life, and we were thriving on a book called New American Poetry, 1945 to 60, which was our Bible, in which we were introduced to all the beat poets and Denise Levertov and Diane DePrima, Robert Creeley, and just these voices which were resonant with our reality. So when I graduated from college, I went on to get a graduate degree in poetry in San Francisco State. And graduate school palled next to the fervor of the streets and the rising counterculture. And I quit graduate school. But as it was, most of my friends turned out to be poets. And by happenstance, a few years later, I was living on a backwoods commune out in Northern California and became friends with Lou Welch, who was an intimate friend of Gary Snyder's, who introduced me to Gary Snyder. And Gary Snyder was the first person I ever met that actually made me realize that Zen practice was about evening out our uneven development. Most people, myself included, have a certain number of talents that we pay a great deal of attention to, and we're rewarded for them, and we let a lot of the other stuff go, like anger, envy, jealousy, all of those things. I resolved to become friends with Gary Snyder, and I did. I grew up on a farm, and so I would go up to the Sierras and work with him on his place. And we had many, many long conversations. But I had never sat zazen. I had never meditated. And in fact, through much of the 60s, I was a heroin user. I was in London in 1969 when heroin use was legal, just as happy as a clam. Anyway, around the end of the 60s, early 73 maybe, the counterculture kind of collapsed. All the communes that I had lived on, we lost our land bases. Children were growing up. They needed schooling. They needed order. And the mother of my child had run away and left me with a daughter. And I realized that I had to, my father died well below broke, and my promised inheritance had evaporated. My father was the kind of man who said, you don't need to worry about money. You'll teach at Harvard, and I'll send you enough money so you can have your suits made in London and your fly rods made. I said, okay. Well, none of that panned out. And so I fell in love with a woman who was a serious practitioner of Zen at San Francisco Zen Center. And I began my Zen practice there. A very poor beginning, I might add. I missed the ecstasies of free life. It seemed to me these people were extremely uptight and reserved. They would get up and leave the room while I was talking. I was offended on numerous fronts. But something about the sitting and the discipline and the calm was a balm to my broken spirit, to be quite frank. And I hung in, and coupled with some serious therapy, I managed to assemble a life in which I could model the life of the Buddha.
So what is Zen, and why do we need it in the vernacular?
So Buddhism has been around for 3,000 years. And like anything else, it's gone through a number of changes. When it first started, for the first 500 years, the supposition was that only monks could become enlightened. They were the only ones who could withdraw from the world enough. And the mantra was end desire. The problem is with desire. Cut off desire. Desire for fame, desire for wealth, desire for worldliness. And one of the interesting things about the Buddha is he begged every day for his food. All of his teachings begin with the Buddha returned from begging, washed his feet and hands, sat down and began to teach. After about 500 years, the implications of the Buddha's philosophy and the intention to save all beings made monastic focus kind of an impracticality. And people said, no, the problem's not desire. We can control desire. Turn them on. Focus them on things that are practical and useful and helpful. And there was this efflorescence of arts and crafts and yoga and priestesses and musicians and expressing the ecstasy of being alive, expressing the unity of the universe. And Buddhism has kind of oscillated back and forth between those polarities. So we still have monastic practices. And the first 8 years of my training were in a monastery. I have to say I changed more than I've ever changed in any singular period like that in my life. But at a certain point, I began to become a little disaffected. It seemed to me here was a whole bunch of well-educated white people, most of us working on personal hang-ups. There were 2 black people and 1 left while I was there. And it just seemed to me that this was far removed from the life of Gary Snyder, who I had observed being as dedicated to his marriage as he was to his community, as he was to his Buddhist practice, as he was to his writing. And he was the first example of a man who had evened out his imbalances. And I began to think, well, okay, if we look at Zen next to the amount of suffering in the world, we're not making very much of an impress on it. We're affording certain kind of white intellectual people a chance to work out their psychological kinks, which is not a bad thing at all. But at the pitch at which disaster is accelerating, it began to feel a little indulgent. And so I had the responsibility of a family and earning a living, and I couldn't stay in a monastery. And I ran into one of the senior students who was now working a secular practice, and I began to study with him. And I felt more at home. So when you ask me, why is Zen in the vernacular? First of all, Zen, among all the sects of Buddhism, and there are many, started in China. It was called Chan, and it was noted because of its short-circuiting of intellectual study. It was a practice of direct transmission, getting to the truth directly. And when Dogen, the great Japanese scholar of the 13th century, became disappointed with what was available to him in Japan, he and his teacher went to China. They studied with a Chinese master, a Chan master, for 10 or 12 years. And then the teacher died. Dogen came back to Japan and he started Zen. So Zen is the Japanese translation of Chan. And it still exists as a kind of sudden school. But forces being what they are, all of these schools had to make a living. So many schools, like the Pure Land School and many Soto schools, they had various exotic services and chimes and chants and bells, which attracted constituents, which attracted money, which attracted support. Zen could not produce enlightenment as a theater sport. You're not going to just sit and watch a bunch of bald-headed guys meditate. It didn't work. So even in Zen, they began to incorporate a lot of ritualized services and things that would be of use to a constituency. So when Suzuki Roshi, the founder of San Francisco Zen Center, first came to America, he had almost no ceremonies. What people did was they sat every day, they did one little chant. And the more I read his script, his Dharma talks, the more I came to the intuition that he was trying to leave a space for America to develop its own voice of Zen. Because most of my life is spent with people who are not wearing robes and bald and working in a monastery. And the difference between American monastic practice and Japanese monastic practice is that in Japan, you might go to a training monastery like Antaiji or Eiheiji for 2 years, and you'll get your brown robes, and then you'll leave and you'll take over a little temple, and you'll spend the rest of your life as a priest in service to a community. You'll do funerals, you do marriages, you'll do naming ceremonies, you'll do celebrations throughout the year. In America, and this is something Gary Snyder warned me about when I was beginning to practice at Zen Center, there are no temples for the priests to go to. So the priests wind up staying at Zen Center. My teacher said it's kind of like a bunch of acting students saying, wow, we love acting school. We're just going to stay here. And somehow you miss the insight that you're not an actor until you get a job. And I don't mean to be brusque about it, but in some ways you're not a priest unless you're helping people. Now, that's not to say that all the priests at Zen Center are not helping people. I don't mean that at all. But the problem for the institution was you had a number of people who never worked, never held jobs. They gave their lives to the institution, and they got old. And so my Dharma brother, who was transmitted by the same teacher that transmitted me, Ed Sadazan, who was the last senior abbot of Zen Center, he probably spent the last 20 years building a kind of retirement village for Americans who would like a Zen flavor to the place that they lived, and also having room for all the old priests who had no money and nowhere to go. Long story short, I thought, my practice is going to be secular, and I have to figure out a way to talk about Buddhism and express Buddhism in ways that Americans will understand that it's a human event, not to be confused by the exotica of Japanese practice or Tibetan practice or Vipassana practice, but to see these are human states and these fancy words like Kensho, like awakening. I mean, I've met machinists who've disappeared into their concentration at a lathe, focusing to such a degree that the ego takes a holiday. I've seen women do the same thing in their knitting. Meditation is a great facilitator of that. It's a great practice. I wanted to be able to explain that to Americans in a way that they could understand and in a way that would seem practical. And so I wrote this book called Zen in the Vernacular to try to say, here's my shot at expressing all this in an American voice.
And things as it is, it's not a grammatical error, but it's the key to understanding something important. So maybe you should explain it.
You know, I'm at such a disadvantage. You get such an edge by having this wonderful English accent. It's everything you say sounds more important than everything I say. But it's true. It is not grammatical. And for many years, I thought it was a quaint mistake on the part of Suzuki Roshi, who was imperfect in his English. Of course, we want to say things as they are. But Suzuki Roshi knew what he was talking about. Things is our way of looking at the world as a plurality. You're over there, I'm here, there's the sky, there's the sun, there's a tree, there's a bird, there's a dog. It's the apparent 10,000 things of the ancient Chinese. But the it is the singularity of which they're all a part. And the two are simultaneous events. And the problem is our ego commandeers our attention so that we forget about the other half. Of course, you're out there, and if I shoot myself in the head, you don't fall down. But both of us have umbilical cords plugged into oxygen, sunlight, water, microbes in the soil, pollinating insects, the birds controlling the pollinating insects. And when you take it out, even to the Earth's place in space, if the Earth was closer to the sun, water would boil off. We wouldn't be here. If it was farther away, it would freeze. And this planet is being held where it is in this perfect location for us to thrive by all the gravitational forces of the universe. So that in some degree, we're like ticks on the body of a dog. And if we forget the dog, we're only ticks.
What a beautiful way of putting it. At the beginning of the program, I said that Zen had a very special approach to sickness, old age, and death. What is the approach?
Well, I think that's a pan-Buddhist phenomenon. So when we were first getting to know one another, you mentioned the Four Noble Truths. So for readers who don't know, the historical record is that the man we call the Buddha was born Gautama Siddhartha. He was the son of a Nepalese king, and his father, like all parents, tried to build a perfect life for his son. And he had a huge estate of thousands and thousands of acres, and his son had courtesans, he had teachers, he had ponies, he was trained as a warrior, he was trained as a rider. Everything was great. He never left the compound, had a wife and child. And one day he basically instructed his charioteer to take him into town. And legend has it that he saw a crippled old woman, disfigured old woman crossing the street. And then he saw lepers. Then he saw bodies being burned and thrown into the Ganges. And he was just flabbergasted. He had never seen things before that were not beautiful. And he was so shaken by this opening of the other half of the world to his sensibilities that he couldn't shake the obsession. And one night he just stole away and went to live in the forest as a mendicant. And he lived for 6 years with a group of 4 or 5 people. And they had made a kind of dichotomy between body and spirit. And they felt that if they weakened the body, the spirit would be strong and bloom. And the Buddha weakened his body to the point that he passed out in a ditch. And he was found by a young servant girl who was carrying an offering of rice and milk to a temple. And she saw this man, skin and bones, unconscious, and she compulsively went down to help him. And she fed him, and the nourishment brought him around. And her compassion brought him around. And the first thing he realized was that this path of desecrating the body or disrespecting the body was not workable. And he coined what he called the middle way. We're not going to indulge the body, but we're not going to punish it. We're not going to not take care of it. And he resolved to sit until he solved the problem that was bothering him, until he became enlightened. And he sat and he sat and he sat. And one day when the morning star arose and he saw it, he and the star were kind of conjoined in the same reality. He woke up to the fact he actually saw the world without his ego. So he thought for almost 49 days, how am I going to explain this to people? What am I going to do? It's too subtle. How am I going to show them? But he decided he could help some people. And so he went back to his mendicants. And as he was approaching, they were, of course, cross with him because he'd had the rice pudding, and they were still eating beetles or whatever it was. So they came back, but they noticed when he came back, he was a different person. And they all spontaneously bowed to him. There was something about him that was so in his body, so in himself, and so resolved of any kind of doubt or anxiety. And he gave a speech about the Four Noble Truths. This is how he broke things down. This is his Buddha's description of reality. Now, usually today, the Four Noble Truths was for me in my practice impenetrable. It's suffering exists. There's a cause of suffering. There's an end of suffering, and there's a path to practice the end of suffering. I just never got it. It didn't seem action-oriented. It didn't explain anything. But some years ago, I ran into a book by David Brazier, who's an English psychologist and Pure Land priest, and he wrote a book called The Feeling Buddha. And he went back to the original Sanskrit, and his explanation of the Four Noble Truths was revelatory. And suddenly it clarified things, and it became the basis of my own teaching. So if you'll permit me, I'll just take you through them.
Yep, let's have the first of the Noble Truths, because this was the one I found that I could understand quite easily, this idea that life is hard. And the minute you actually accept that you stop blaming yourself for not being able to do it like a maestro.
Yes.
And I've found that that's the bit that I can manage. I can accept that life is hard,
yes.
But help me really understand the first.
Well,
of
the
Four Noble Truths.
Buddha helped us because we all tend to feel that our suffering is related to our lack of spiritual development. And the first thing he said to us is that's BS. So the first noble truth is dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A. And we don't have to wonder what it means because the Buddha explained it in this first speech. And he said, dukkha is being born, dying, being in pain, grieving, being withheld from situations that you want to be in, and being stuck in situations that you don't want to be in. And he didn't use the word suffering. The word suffering was done by Christian translators of Sanskrit and Pali. And it tended to mislead people and make people believe that Buddha was saying life is suffering. And that's not what he was saying at all. So David Brazier uses the word affliction. Dukkha means affliction. And affliction basically is what stirs the pot. When we're too cold, we move closer to the fire. When we're too hot, we move farther away. The mountains are being afflicted by sandy winds. Everything is being afflicted. You're not being afflicted because you're spiritually undeveloped. This is the way the universe is. It's not your fault. And he calls it a noble truth. So if truth means anything, it means real. And if noble means anything, it means worthy of dignity and worthy of respect. So he's saying this is the ground of existence. This is what keeps us moving. This is what keeps life always changing. It is a noble truth, and it's not your fault, so you might as well face it head on and clear-eyed. And don't increase your problems by running away, because it's always the running away where we get in trouble. It's the running away that puts us in the wrong bed, using our credit card too much, drinking too much, taking drugs. So that's dukkha. That's the first noble truth.
And it's something that is incredibly important to me as a therapist. Sort of more or less in some ways, it's like my central message is don't repudiate the feeling, but examine it. And yes. I think that's your message as well, isn't it?
Well, it's Buddha's message. And I see we're both wearing Buddha black. So the feeling is the second noble truth. And the second noble truth is called samudaya, and it means arising. And it means when we're afflicted, things arise. Someone cuts us off in traffic, anger, fear, vengefulness arise. That's not your fault either. That's just a natural reaction like the other seat of a seesaw. If you act on it, that's a problem. But if you observe it, accept it, investigate it, and don't relate it to an idea of a self, just look at it as a body-mind phenomenon that's going to pass through if you don't feed it. That's the second noble truth. And the first noble truth that you can do something about is the third one. And the third one is called nirodha. And nirodha means containment. And in Pali or Sanskrit, nirodha relates to a clay wall that peasants built around their fire pits to stop sparks from leaping into the fields or the villages and destroying them. Any Nepalese peasant would have understood this. So the fire for Buddha is the passion. The containment is the meditating. And what you learn from meditating, sitting in a posture, cutting down stimulation to the body and mind by being immobile, concentrating on your breathing, and just living in vertical time. You're not progressing, you're not going anywhere, you're just watching and becoming intimate with the mind and body, is that you will learn that you can withstand whatever arises. There is no grief that's too much to bear. There is no joy or ecstasy or dark desire that you cannot look at. We have an acronym for this looking at it. It's called RAIN. The R in RAIN stands for recognize. When something comes up, I'm angry. Recognize it. Oh, anger's here. So you don't want to act while you're angry, but here it is. The A in RAIN is for accept. Okay, I have to accept I'm angry. No matter how spiritually developed I think I am, I'm angry. The I stands for investigate. Where in the body is it? How is it affecting me? What is it making me feel? Have I ever experienced an instant like this before? What's the first one I can remember? What's the trigger? And the N, maybe the most important one, stands for non-self. Don't make it a fixed embodiment of yourself, of your idea of yourself. Because Buddha's insight is there is no fixed self. There's nothing inside of us that corresponds to an organ. The thing we call I and me and mine is an awareness. And the good news is that that awareness is malleable. If there are habits and things about ourselves that we don't like, we can, by diligence, change them. But it's not like we have an armature, as in a sculpture, that is somehow distorted or bent, and we just can't beat it.
The thing that I was always taught when I did a little bit of going to a local Buddhist center was that the problem was attachment, being attached to particular outcomes. How does that fit into your idea of the Four Noble Truths?
Well, I don't know how you could get through life not being attached to your children or your lover or the work that you do. It sounds easy to say not to be attached, but I think that one of the things that meditation teaches you is that everything is changing all the time. And even the thing you think you're attached to is changing while you're attached to it. So the attachment is a kind of fixity. It's a kind of attempt to hold things in place. If it's a good thing, I don't want this moment to change. If it's a bad thing, I want this moment out of here. They're both attachment. So when you make a good practice of sitting, you can actually examine the attachment. Is this a thought I'm holding on to? Can I let this thought go? Can I experience it when it comes up and let it go when it's done? Suzuki Roshi used to say, it's fine to allow your thoughts to come in. You don't have to invite them to tea.
So I want to quote you in your book, which I thought was interesting. For many years, I suffered from wanting to be happy. I spent most of my time bemoaning the fact that I was not happy and cataloguing the symptoms of my sorrows. One day, I gave up caring whether I was happy. I began to relate to my emotional states as if they were internal weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes frigid or cloudy, and bingo, I realized I was happy most of the time. Can you explain a little bit more about how you reached that position? Because it
I
sounds
wish
a
I
really
could.
good place to be.
Yeah, well, meditating. I mean, when you meditate, everything comes through your mind. And remember, you're paying attention. Meditation is about stillness. And whether you're in a chair or whether you're sitting with your legs crossed, your posture is erect. If you're left-handed, you place your right hand over your left. You put the knuckle of the middle finger in the indentation of that knuckle, and you touch the tips of your thumbs together to make a round, fat circle. We call that your awareness gauge. When that circle collapses, you've stopped paying attention. If your thumbs disappear. If you're right-handed, you put your left hand on top. You're suppressing your active side. So when you sit zazen for a long time, you become incredibly familiar with the weather. Oh, I'm having a bummer. Oh, where is it in my body? What's it doing? And at a certain point, it just becomes boring to go over what daddy did or what mommy did or what, my aunt or my teacher or this. You just sound like a whiny little bitch to yourself. And it just falls away. But you need the time to actually explore and look at these things and let the body leach them out of your muscles and ligaments, because that's where the unconscious is, in my understanding. Things that are too important to forget, we stuff into the body. And I've had experiences in sessions where you're sitting for a week at a time, from 5:30 in the morning till 10 at night, of a ligament suddenly loosening and being flooded with emotions that just evaporate. They're gone. They've been held there because at one point they were very important.
So let's move on to the fourth of the Noble
Truths. Yeah. So by the time you reach a level of growth and discipline and confidence that you can withstand whatever's going to arise, it's not going to escape your teeth involuntarily. It's not going to activate your muscles and you're going to flip somebody off, which is very close to pulling a trigger. Then Marga is the fourth noble truth. And Marga is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is the way in which we model the life of a Buddha in our own. It's a kind of circle. It begins with right view. The Buddha said right. My teacher and I, we say Buddhist view because we don't like the connotation of wrong if you're not doing it. So the Buddhist view is that everything is changing, everything is interdependent, or he called it dependent originations. No sunlight, no leaf, no apple, no water, no apple, no. Anyway, you can see how it's pretty simple. That view gives rise to the Buddhist idea of emptiness. And emptiness is not a void. It's not nothing. Emptiness refers to a kind of pregnant energy. It's not a substrate of the universe because it is the universe. And it's always turning into form. It's always expressing itself as form. And when you see that and understand that the trees, the leaves, the hummingbirds, the mountain ranges, the people, the cultures, everything is emanations of this fundamental energy. Everything assumes a kind of difference. I may not like that I'm made of the same thing as Donald Trump, but it's an indisputable fact. And so I can't just sit on my high horse and say I'm a good person and he's not. I'm a human being. And if I acknowledge being a human being, it means I have the full spectrum of human behavior at the ready inside me. And when I call myself a good guy, I've expunged all my shadow sides and I've put them on other people that I now call the enemy. But if I understand that I could be Hitler, I could be Mother Teresa, I could be Jesus, I could be, a grifter begging coins in the street, then I'm going to monitor myself. And Buddhist mindfulness is dedicated to watching your states of mind so that you don't actually express physically or verbally statements that are not in accord with this right view. So the second step, Buddhist speech. Am I speaking to everything as if it's a miraculous expression of the universe? Am I tendering it respect? Am I being kind? Am I accepting that it's here for some unknown karmic reason, from a long karmic braid that extends back into timelessness? that I don't have a high horse to stand on, to be judgmental and look down on anyone. Buddhist action. Am I behaving as if understanding is embedded in my body? Buddhist livelihood. Am I making a living in a way which does not extend suffering and does not extend hurting to people, does not take advantage of people? Probably wouldn't see a Buddhist dope dealer. You don't see many Buddhist butchers. But again, we don't judge. We are trying to model the life of a Buddha. And the great Zen master Hakuin, Rinzai Zen master, who had many, many Kensho and enlightenment experiences, he actually called his final Kensho the acknowledgement that the Eightfold Path is itself enlightenment. It's the map that an enlightened mind laid out for us. And Buddhist effort, Buddhist concentration, Buddhist mindfulness. We have Buddha nature within us that we consult. There are no Buddhist police. So it means that at every juncture where we're making a decision, we ask ourselves, according to the precepts, is this the right effort? Am I working as hard as I can? Am I taking good care of myself? Am I mindful? Am I speaking kindly? And to the degree that we perfect this, we get closer and closer to actually expressing the life of a Buddha in our own. And then other people see it and they can model it if they like it. And it's that modeling that passes it on from generation to generation so that the supposedly impossible vow, beings are numberless, I vow to save them, actually has the possibility of being realized as more and more people adopt this behavior. So dukkha, affliction, samudaya, arising, that's the yin and yang, the sawing back and forth of the universe on us, disease, pain, suffering, loss, nirodha, containment. And by the time we do that, then it's putting this life into practice and living yourself. So I'll tell you just a quick story. When I went into the movie business, I was really at a loss because I was broke. I needed to get my kids in school. I needed to have a house for my family. And I'd been living for many years in a kind of communal situation where your ego was held in check by everybody else's. And we did everything anonymously in my clan called the Diggers. And I thought, how am I going to go to Hollywood? What am I going to do here? This is all about vainglory and fame and wealth and status and ego. And when I was thinking about it, I realized, well, I was not going to be able to control the movie that I was being hired to do. I was a hired hand. I could always turn it down if it was offensive, but how was I going to behave? And I decided, well, I could control how I make the movie. And so I took myself through a number of vows. I'll treat everybody identically. I won't recognize status differentials between the assistants on the set and the stars and the directors. I'll be punctual. I'll know my work. I'll be ready. I'll be cheerful and friendly and keep the working environment as light and as fun as I can. And I had a whole list of things like that. And I'm not exaggerating that every other movie, I've done 160 movies, at least every other movie, somebody came up to me in a quiet time and said, hey, do you have some kind of religion or something? And I'd say, well, why do you ask? And they say, I don't know, man, but you're always the first one on the set. You're nice to everybody. You never get uptight. You never lose your temper. You're always prepared. You treat me as nicely as you do the star. What's going on? So these kind of intentions are visible. We think our inner life is not visible. Our inner life is visible in the map of our face and our behavior, what we do and how we respond. And that's what the Eightfold Path is about perfecting.
That's beautiful. We're going to look and see how that might fit with a letter that's been sent in to me, and we'll be doing that in a moment.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material and other benefits.
Guess how long I've been helping couples have more fulfilling relationships? The answer shocked me. 39 years. Over this time, I've developed all sorts of interventions to help couples communicate better, and make meaningful changes to protect and nurture their love. Some ideas I've used for a while and dropped, but at the core, there are a handful of must-haves that I use with all the couples I see face to face. Sadly, I can't work with everyone who wants my help, but I can share my best relationship tools. I've put them in a new course with worksheets and links to my most helpful podcasts. There are 4 hours of instructions to do at your pace together, with your partner or on your own, and it normally retails at £150. But to launch, I've dropped them to a special introductory price of £99.50. If you'd like to find out more, go to andrewgmarshall.com/tools and get started on improving your relationship.
Podbean, your message amplified.
Ready to share your message with the world? Start your podcast journey with Podbean.
Podbean, the AI-powered all-in-one podcast platform.
Thousands of businesses and enterprises trust Podbean to launch their podcasts.
Use Podbean to record your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to optimize your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to turn your blog into a podcast.
Use Podbean to distribute your podcast everywhere.
Launch your podcast on Podbean today.
Looking to lose weight and get healthier without shakes, bars, or processed meal replacements? When you feel like your calories are too high, go low. With GoLo Foods, that is. GoLo Foods are balanced, low-calorie, high-nutrient meals created by chefs and nutrition experts to help you burn fat and make healthy eating easy and affordable. Each 10-ounce GoLo meal is packed with 16 farm-fresh superfoods, preservative-free and delicious, all for a better price than average takeout meals and many fast foods. Expertly cooked, snap frozen to lock in all nutrients and flavor and delivered free to your door. Just heat in minutes and enjoy. No shopping, cooking, or cleanup. Why waste money on processed meals with fillers, dyes, and higher sodium when you can have real food? With 5 delicious varieties like chicken, beef, egg, plant-based, and chicken and rice, healthy eating has never been this convenient. Ready to make the switch? Lower your calories and boost your weight loss the easy way today at golofoods.com. That's GOLO Foods.com. golofoods.com. Over 1 million meals and counting.
If you'd like to have the collective wisdom of my guests, all you have to do is go to my website, www.andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, and you'll find a place to participate in the program. And this is the letter I have for us today. I have a long-term health problem, neuropathy, which leaves me in quite a bit of pain most of the time. Sometimes it is relentless and severe, sometimes it comes and goes. I've tried various medications with differing results. My doctor quotes his grandmother, who would say she knew she was alive because she had aches and pains. I believe it's his way of saying I have to live with it. I recently attended a retreat where, as part of the opening ceremony, we were told to put what would not serve us for the coming days on the fire. I wanted more than anything to put my pain on the fire, but of course that's not possible. But perhaps there is something about my attitude to my illness that I could discard. I suppose what I'm asking is, how can I have a meaningful life and a fulfilled life with my health condition? How can I find a balance between accepting my limits and being open to new challenges? I fear my doctor can't help me with these philosophical or even spiritual questions. Over to you, Andrew, and your guests. Well, in this case, I think it's over to Peter.
Well, it's a lovely letter. So, I have neuropathy.
Oh, brilliant.
In both of my feet.
Sorry, I don't mean brilliant, but it's very helpful for us at this moment.
In both of my feet. And they alternately burn and freeze, and the proprioception from them is not good. And I'll be walking along the sidewalk, and I'll suddenly step on the outside of my foot and have to cross my other foot over it to keep my balance. And I'm heading at a 45-degree angle off for where I was going. Or I turn a corner in the house too quickly and turn into a wall. It's not excruciating, but it's painful. When I was sitting sessions, you get up at 5:30 in the morning, you sit a 40-minute sitting period, you walk for 5 minutes in a very formal kinhin, you sit again, you maybe do 4 of those periods, then you may have a lecture you go to, then you may get a 15-minute break for a cup of tea, then you do some more periods. You may be sitting 14, 40-minute periods a day. By the end of the second day, there are levels of pain that you cannot imagine. You feel like you're being chewed slowly by a beast. My knees and my legs are just killing me. And the only thing you can do is look at it and examine it. And one of the curious things that happens is as you look at it and examine it, it changes a little bit because the pain itself is not a fixed thing that the word would present. It's also a living engagement in a living body. And by investigating, you somehow find these little caesuras, these little pauses where you can catch your breath or where you can alter your balance just a little bit and relieve some of the pain. When I was in my 60s, I was sitting such a sesshin, and I was in such pain that I called my teacher and I said, I can't do this. I have to quit. I can't do it. It was the third day. And he said, listen, you're mourning your old age. You're mourning your 65, 66-year-old body. All your cards are on the table. You're not getting any more cards. You only have one set of knees. If you have to sit in a chair, sit in a chair. You have to take care of yourself. You're not an 18-year-old that Zazen is designed to break. It's like boot camp in the Marines. And getting permission to do that, I began alternating one period in a chair, one period on my cushion. And the cessation of pain actually gave me the opportunity to focus on this question I was asking. What is it? What is it? What is it I'm looking for all these years? And the concentration by on the third or fourth day, that broke through into a Kensho experience, which I wrote about in a book called The Rain Man's Third Cure. Sometimes we cannot avoid pain. We cannot avoid the affliction. So you have to figure out, what is it in my life which can help a little? Does diet affect it? Does posture affect it? Does wearing socks at night affect it? I wear socks every night. I keep my feet warm. I see an acupuncturist who's actually helped me with my neuropathy. There's a muscle that runs down the shin, the front of the shin, which as we age constricts around a nerve. And the acupuncturist can put a needle in that muscle and put electricity on it, and that muscle will loosen up. And I got kind of extraordinary relief. But be that as it may, this is your koan. A koan is a kind of Zen riddle. You've heard, what's the sound of one hand clapping? There are any number of them. There are things that you cannot think your way through logically. Your grandmother was correct. You are alive to suffer. You'd have no suffering if you were dead. Neither would you have any joy. So putting it in the kind of perspective, but meditating and actually facing this pain dead on without distraction, getting more and more and more intimate and explicit with it, is the only thing I know that works. It may not stop it, but it will alter it. It will alter your relationship to it, even if it makes you less attached to being concerned with it all the time and worrying about it all the time. And what does it mean? You'll find places where your neuropathy is not hurting. And these are the places that you can soar. When you get these attacks, you'll have to change your posture and what you're doing. But if that's the price tag for the gift of life, I'll choose it. That's as much as I know about it, honestly.
Certainly, that's a postcard from the front. So thank you very much for that. For somebody who's listening to this program and saying, well, maybe I should do some meditating, how long should they be meditating for? Because a whole week sound a little ambitious.
Well, yes, it's ambitious and it requires a whole team to do that. People have to be cooking for you, doing all sorts of things. It's a great privilege to sit a week, even though it takes everything you have and then another big bite. One thing you can do is you can go to any Zen or Buddhist temple and learn how to meditate. You don't have to join them. You don't have to feel like you have to enter a cult or shave your head. There's a wonderful book called Taking the Path of Zen by Robert Aitken, who was an early teacher of mine, and it's a real how-to. He shows you how to sit, shows you the posture, what to do with your hands, and answers very basic questions. And I would say start with a cookie timer. Start with 10 minutes. And if you do 10, go up to 11 the next day or twice a day. If you get up to 20, 25 minutes a day as a regular practice, within a month, you'll find that the inside of your head feels like it's opened up considerably, that little self that you're familiar with is inhabiting a much larger space. You can do it in a chair facing a wall. You can do it you want a pillow under your butt so you can maintain a natural curve in your back. You don't have to do a full lotus. I pull one foot up on my thigh, but you can also sit with your legs parallel on the floor. And this mudra, what you're trying to do is engage the entire body in this posture. You're pulling your ears back slightly over your shoulder by tucking your chin. You're trying to get rid of tension. You let your belly pooch out and just breathe. And normally when we begin, we count our exhales. So we inhale. The first exhale is 1, just as if you were releasing this breath out into the world like a little bird. The next breath will take care of itself if you're alive. The next exhale is 2. And if you can get up to 10, you do it again. You won't get up to 10. Don't be hard on yourself. Just start over at 1. And little by little, like anything else, we call it a practice. You'll get better at it. And you'll have periods of clear sailing where you're just there and it's beyond the ideas of your ego and your personality. You'll afford yourself 10 minutes or 20 minutes without the telephone, the computer, music playing. I don't like guided meditations at all. I don't want somebody inside my head telling me what to do. Silence is the best. I do it first thing in the morning. I do it every day that I can. What's most important is to make a vow and keep it. If you say, I'm going to do 10 minutes a day, make yourself do 10 minutes every day. Then if at the end of a month, you say, well, that was a little much. Okay, do 10 minutes 5 times a week. Try that. Do that for a month. If you can do that, go up to 15 minutes. But whatever commitment you make, you want to practice honoring it and not letting yourself off the hook, because that's the way you'll encounter all the little babyish indulgent stuff about your ego and personality. Oh no, I'm tired. I'll just take a nap. I'll do it tomorrow. And we're all the same. So Zen is a way of manifesting a warrior's spirit against all the blandishments and inducements of the world to sell yourself out.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for being a witness on The Meaningful Life today. And as a witness on The Meaningful Life, I need to ask you what makes your life meaningful.
I would say waking up. I feel like a blessed man. My children are both alive and healthy, and they like me. They've decided I'm not a total ass. I married for the 3rd time and at 82 this last October. And
congratulations.
I think got it right. The theme of our wedding was 3rd time's the charm. And it was. I've finally become the man that I hoped could live with a woman of such caliber and intellect and grace. I live in a wonderful part of Northern California. I live in a neighborhood where I know all my neighbors. We have emergency lists together because of fires and stuff. We're all looking after each other. And I feel like, it's pretty paradisical. I have little heart issues and little thises and that's, but here I am on the green side of the grass. So it's all meaningful to me.
So we're going to finish in a second, but if you'd like to hear more, we're going to be discussing an idea from Zen, which is we already have everything we need, but we don't know it. So I'll be discussing that with Peter in a moment. If you want to hear the bonus material, you can subscribe directly via Apple or Spotify. And if you want to become a supporter of The Meaningful Life and unlock the bonus material this way, here are the details.
You've been listening to The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. You can follow Andrew on Twitter, like him on Facebook, and please leave a review wherever you consume your podcasts. Making, editing, and distributing The Meaningful Life comes with substantial costs, and we'd like to ask for your help. visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material for every program, send in a letter to be discussed by Andrew and his guests, and join a community of other people seeking to make their life meaningful. At the gold level, you get even more benefits. Production of The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall is by Michael Dooney. Social media by Madeleine Healy. Sound engineering and theme tune by Sebastian de la Luz Mendoza. And I'm Susie Colick. Please tell your friends and spread the word. Thank you.
At the UPS Store, we understand the importance of a first impression. That's why we're here to help you put your best foot forward and be unstoppable with our printing services. With high-quality paper stock options, banners, business cards, menus, and more, we make sure your small business stands out and your message reaches the masses. After all, we're the one-stop prints that pop store. Most locations are independently owned. Product, services, prices, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Be unstoppable. Come into your local store today and get your print on.